Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over episode 23 of Cowboy Bebop. If you'd like to watch along, start watching now. Alright, so this episode is called Brain Scratch, and I seem to recall it being an episode based largely around a cult. So this first sequence is very likely a cult indoctrination video, and looking at it now, it kind of reminds me of Heaven's Gate, which was a cult a while ago. They had this whole thing about how the human body was an impure vessel and you could sort of ascend beyond that. And they really just ended up killing themselves in the end. But yeah, no, they definitely believe they could ascend to something higher than humanity and that their mortal flesh was merely a vessel. And it is in a sense, but I don't think it is in the way they believed it was. So it seems that this cult, Scratch, has made the news and run afoul of law enforcement already. So I'd say odds are good. They're probably going to have a bounty out on them in one form or another. So, based on that little snippet of news, it seems like they really are sort of like Heaven's Gate in that people are offing themselves to ascend beyond humanity. You know, as appealing as the idea of not having to worry about maintaining a physical body sounds, I feel like it would be much worse to be a soul with no personal agency. That's an existential horror in its own right. So, I think all things considered, I'm pretty content with my flesh. So, the interesting bit about this sequence is that it appears as though somebody else is watching TV and we're sort of watching from their point of view. Alright, so here's a plot thread. Faye is apparently hanging out with the cult, and she doesn't look like she's all there. So it sounds like neither Jet nor Spike really knew that this was going on, so it's not like a setup on the part of the Bebop crew. It seems like even in the future year 2071, advertising is still absolutely annoying. So, based on this information that Jet's dug up, it sounds like the man behind the cult just kind of went off the deep end. And generally, that's how cults tend to form. Like, it's one lunatic attracts a bunch of other lunatics, but it's that first lunatic that you really have to watch out for. It's more than just being sort of unhinged. They have to have like a sort of charisma too in order to attract other lunatics. So Spike, notably, is pretty dismissive of this whole cult thing, and Jet's just sort of matter of fact about it. There's a bounty on this guy's head, might as well take it. It's a nice dichotomy between the two of them. I mean, obviously Spike wants the money too. They need to eat after all, but he doesn't really care very much at all, and he's pretty dismissive. So here we cut back to Faye, and it's become clear that she was just playing along. She's a lot more lucid than she made herself appear, so it seems like she truly is just in it for the money after all, rather than having been suckered in by the cult. Now things start to get a little creepy here because she's in a very clearly dilapidated building, and all these electronic screens are turning on by themselves and producing nothing but fuzz. If people are in fact migrating into electronics as the cult had claimed, then that might be indicative of all actual people. So Spike's doing some work on the ground and he's talking to a guy handing out flyers. I've met people like this in real life, and I think they've done a good job of capturing the essence of what it's like to talk to people like that. So while everybody's sort of chasing down different leads, It seems like nobody's making much progress. Jet's talking to former colleagues of the cult leader. Ed is searching cyberspace, and Spike is just talking to various cult recruiters. Spike seems to be making the most progress, but only marginally. So that Big Shot TV show where they talk about bounties, they make it pretty clear that they really have no information on Dr. Landez either, and it's almost as if he doesn't exist. Sometimes foreshadowing is fairly, I guess, foreshadowing can be subtle sometimes. I wouldn't call this a case of that. So it seems like the Bebop crew has finally gotten a concrete lead via a transmission from Faye, which seemed rather dire. So Jet's following down the VR video game lead, while Spike goes off to find Faye and figure out what she knows. So it looks like the video game console was made by the cult itself. So the cult speak is getting, rather esoteric. Interestingly enough, Ein is reacting to it. It might be, it could just be some base animal instinct, or it could be another instance of Ein being highly intelligent. It's hard to tell, really. So it seems like this VR stuff is adversely affecting Jet. Alright, so it seems like this was an instance of Ein being intelligent after all, because he bit Jet, hard enough to break his focus. So, despite hearing about this rather harrowing experience, Spike is pretty nonchalant. Spike is nonchalant enough to suggest that he wants to try the migration himself. So after doing a bit of hacking, Jet and Ed reached the conclusion that Dr. Londas never existed, interestingly enough, and that all the information originated from a hospice. The plot continues to thicken. So Ed and Jet disguise themselves to check out this hospice. And I must say, their disguises don't look particularly convincing, but I'd say Jet's a decent enough actor to make do, and, as long as you ignore Ed, everything should go pretty well. So Jet manages to put on the waterworks to sort of get past the medical orderly. So Spike arrives to where Faye was hanging out and confronts Dr. Londas, and he appears on all these different monitors simultaneously, but there's no sign of any physical body. So Dr. Londas, if that's his real name, has a out really nihilistic outlook on life. So Spike sort of speaks out of ignorance, saying, "Hey, how about you come out here?" But it seems like it might not be possible. Meanwhile, at the hospice, Ed and Jet have approached, I guess, a kid in a coma on life support, and he's apparently controlling all this via his brain waves. And they're going to try disconnecting him, not from life support, but just from his control of everything. So Dr. Londas is making some pretty salient points about the dangers of television and how In essence, it's becoming a religion in and of itself, something that people trust blindly. So Dr. Londas becomes deeply fearful when they start disconnecting him. It becomes clear that he wasn't acting out of malice necessarily, but more because he is, in fact, a consciousness stuck in what is essentially a lifeless body. I'd imagine there are a few fates worse than being trapped in a coma. So I guess with that in mind, it sort of makes sense of his philosophy about how the human body is little more than a prison. From his point of view, it makes sense because his body is his own prison in a sense. So it seems like even with the kid disconnected from the wider world, bits of his Dr. Landis character were still being broadcast. And the last thing he says about is about how the human body is a vessel too small for the greatness of the human soul. And I guess when you put it like that, that's interesting. I don't know if I agree with the idea of getting rid of the body, but I would say I certainly agree that there is greatness in the human soul. All right. So, based off of this trailer, it seems like the next episode is gonna be a real doozy. It seems to center pretty heavily on Faye and Ed, and if memory serves, this is where things start to get really somber. But that's a matter for another time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, stick around for the next one.